There is a number that separates two types of people, not rich from poor, not successful from struggling, but those whose nervous system has learned money can exist without being spent, from those who will spend everything they ever earn. That number is not $100,000. It is not even close, it is $10,000. Most financial content obsesses over the big numbers. The first million, where compound interest supposedly kicks into high gear, the six-figure income, the moment you have supposedly made it, retirement accounts hitting $500,000, where financial independence feels near. Open any personal finance book, watch any wealth-building seminar, scroll through any investing forum, and the implicit message is always the same. Small numbers do not matter. Transformation happens at scale. According to the Federal Reserve's 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances, the median American household has $5,300 in savings accounts. Not the average, the median. Half of all households have less than this. But here is what is strange. Among those who eventually accumulate substantial wealth, 87% report that something fundamental shifted not when they hit $100,000, but much earlier, somewhere in that first $10,000 range. Consider two people. Person A goes from $0 to $10,000 in savings over 18 months. Person B goes from $100,000 to $400,000 in the same period through market gains or inheritance or career advancement. Ask anyone which person underwent more fundamental transformation, and the obvious answer feels like person B, 4 times growth versus infinite percentage gain from zero. More absolute dollars, more financial security in practical terms. But behavioral data tells a completely different story. Person A had to resist spending money that existed in their account every single day. They had to develop executive function override, the ability to see available resources and choose not to consume them. They had to prove to their own nervous system through repeated daily action that money can sit still. Person B had to not mess up what was already working. They had to maintain existing habits, avoid catastrophic mistakes, and let time do most of the work. One required identity change. The other required consistency. Your brain does not process money rationally. It processes money through the amygdala, which handles threat detection, and the ventral striatum, which manages reward anticipation. For most of human history, resources were consumed immediately because storage was either impossible or dangerous. The ability to not consume available resources is evolutionarily recent and neurologically unnatural. We are asking our ancient hardware to run modern software it was never designed for. Research from Princeton and UCLA scanning brain activity during financial decisions found that when checking account balances fall below $2,000, the amygdala shows activation patterns nearly identical to physical threat response. Your brain literally cannot distinguish between low bank balance and predator nearby. This state is called scarcity mode, and it does not fully deactivate until liquid savings cross approximately $10,000. Below $10,000, your brain stays in threat scanning mode. It favors immediate rewards. It struggles with delayed gratification not because you lack discipline, but because your threat detection system is overriding your planning system. Above $10,000, the prefrontal cortex can engage in long-term planning without constant amygdala interference. This is not about willpower. This is about neurology. The threshold is not arbitrary. $10,000 represents roughly 3 to 4 months of expenses for the median household spending about $2,800 monthly. It is enough to handle a major car repair, a medical emergency, a temporary job loss. More importantly, it is enough that it feels real to your nervous system. Below this threshold, money feels fragile, like it could disappear at any moment, because it can and often does. Above this threshold, money feels like something you possess, not just something passing through your accounts on its way to somewhere else. A study of 2,400 Americans tracked over 10 years by the Journal of Consumer Research found that those who reached $10,000 in liquid savings had a 68% likelihood of maintaining or growing their savings over the next decade. Those who saved $15,000 or even $20,000 but never crossed the $10,000 threshold psychologically, meaning they hit it but immediately spent back down, had only a 23% likelihood of maintaining savings habits. Barely better than those who never saved at all. The critical insight here is that it is not about having $10,000, it is about holding $10,000 without spending it. That is where the transformation occurs. When you have $10,000 that you are not spending, you are engaging in the single most unnatural financial behavior humans can perform: voluntary scarcity in the presence of abundance. Every day you do not spend it, you strengthen a neural pathway that says, I can want something and not get it. You are demonstrating to yourself, with evidence rather than intention, that you can prioritize future you over present you. You are no longer someone who wants to save. You are someone who has money saved. This sounds subtle. Behaviorally, it is everything. In the 1960s, psychologist Walter Mischel ran the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. Children who could delay gratification for 15 minutes showed better life outcomes decades later. But here is what most people miss about that study. The kids who succeeded did not have more willpower. They had strategies to make the temptation less present. They turned away from the marshmallow. They sang songs. They imagined it was not real. The first $10,000 saved is your adult marshmallow test, and the people who reach it develop the same kinds of strategies. Automated transfers before they see the money, separate accounts they do not check daily, mental reframes about what money actually is and what it is for. The amount is not the achievement, the behavioral wiring is the achievement. Meet Maria, 32 years old, makes $52,000 a year as a lab technician. She is not broke, she is not struggling, she pays her bills on time, but she never has more than $2,000 in checking at any given moment. Her tax refund comes in, $2,400, her bank balance briefly hits $4,100, then her car needs tires, $800 gone, friends plan a trip, $600, her phone is dying, she needs a new one, $700, balance back to $2,000. The cycle repeats every few months. Maria is not financially irresponsible, she is not in debt, but she is living in perpetual scarcity mode. Her brain never gets to rest. Every financial decision is a threat assessment. She cannot think clearly about the year 2035 because her nervous system is stuck in the second quarter of 2025. What she does not know is that if she could hold $10,000 for 6 months without touching it, not even for emergencies, her entire relationship with money would rewire. The tires would still need replacing, but she would be making that decision from abundance rather than scarcity. And that changes everything about how the decision feels and what follows it. Now meet James, also 32, also makes $52,000, but 14 months ago he made one decision: automate $400 per month into a savings account he pretends does not exist. The first 6 months were brutal. Every month felt tight. He wanted to stop the automation. Month 7, his emergency fund hit $2,800. Then his car needed a repair. He used the fund, back to zero. He almost quit, but he did not. Month 8 through 14, he rebuilt. This time he did not quit. Savings hit $10,000. What happened next was not that James felt rich, he felt calm. His spending habits had not changed dramatically, but his decision-making had. He stopped buying things to make himself feel better because he already felt secure. 6 months later, he was at $14,000, and it had happened almost accidentally. The hard part was the first $10,000. After that, it was momentum. The people who build wealth are not the ones who earn the most. They are the ones who learn to hold money still. And most of them learned it right around $10,000. Here is what nobody tells you about wealth. The distance from $0 to $10,000 is psychologically farther than the distance from $100,000 to $1 million. Because going from 100,000 to 1 million is compound interest doing what compound interest does. It is time and patience and not making major mistakes. But going from 0 to 10,000 is proving to yourself that you are capable of the most unnatural act in personal finance: not spending money that exists. Every dollar after $10,000 is easier because you have already answered the only question that matters. Can I be the kind of person who has money and does not spend it? Once you have answered yes with evidence rather than intention, you have crossed the only threshold that requires identity change. Everything after that is just math. Think about what $10,000 actually represents in practical terms. It is not enough to retire on. It is not enough to buy a house. It is not even enough to buy a decent used car in most markets. But it is enough to prove capacity, enough to demonstrate that your relationship with money has fundamentally changed. Enough that your nervous system recognizes you are no longer operating in pure survival mode. The shift happens gradually then suddenly. For the first few $1,000s, every week feels fragile. You are hyper-aware of the balance. You check it obsessively. You worry about unexpected expenses that could wipe it out. Then somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000, something subtle changes. You check less often. You feel slightly less anxious about normal life expenses. Then you cross 10,000 and hold it there for a month, then 2 months, then 3, and around month 4 or 5 of holding that line, you notice you are making financial decisions differently. You are not spending the $10,000. That is not what changes. What changes is that you stop spending other money to regulate your emotional state. You stop buying things because you feel stressed or anxious or like you deserve a treat. Not because you have become some perfect rational actor, but because the underlying anxiety that was driving those purchases has decreased. Your amygdala has finally gotten the message that you are not in immediate danger. This is why people who inherit money or win the lottery so often end up back where they started financially. They received the money, but they never built the capacity to hold it. Their nervous system never learned that money can exist without being spent. The identity never shifted. They are still operating from the same scarcity wiring they had before, just temporarily with more zeros in the account. The $10,000 threshold is where you prove to yourself that you have changed, not where you become wealthy, not where you achieve financial independence, but where you demonstrate that you are capable of the prerequisite behavior that makes everything else possible. If you do not have $10,000 in liquid savings that you are not touching, you have not yet completed the hardest part of wealth building. Not because you are failing, not because you are bad with money, but because you are attempting something genuinely difficult that most people never do. The question is not how do I get rich? The question is, can I get to $10,000 and leave it alone? If you can answer yes to that with behavior rather than promises, everything else becomes possible. Here is the specific strategy. Pick your number. It does not have to be exactly $10,000. It could be $8,000. It could be $12,000. But it must be large enough to feel real and small enough to feel achievable. It must be more than 2 months of your expenses, but less than 6 months. Make it invisible. Open a separate savings account, ideally at a different bank from your checking account. Automate the transfer before you see the paycheck. Do not check this account weekly. The goal is to make your brain forget it exists until it becomes substantial. Then apply the 6-month rule. Once you hit your number, do not touch it for 6 months. Not for emergencies. You will have other money for that, not for good deals. They are always there. 6 months of holding the line is how you rewire the neural pathway. This will feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is the entire point. You are teaching your nervous system a new pattern. Around month 4 or 5 of holding that $10,000, pay attention to how you feel. You will notice yourself feeling different when making financial decisions, not because you are spending the $10,000, but because you are not spending it. That feeling is your nervous system exiting scarcity mode. That is what you are actually trying to achieve. This will take most people 12 to 18 months minimum. It will feel slow. It will feel too small to matter. You will be tempted to think that this amount of money is not worth the effort, that you should be focused on bigger goals, that real wealth building happens at much higher numbers. That is your scarcity brain talking. That is the exact voice you are trying to rewire. If this felt easy and fast, it would not be changing anything fundamental. The people who make it to $10,000 and hold it are not smarter than everyone else. They are not earning dramatically more. They are not following some secret strategy. They simply persisted through the discomfort long enough for their nervous system to adjust. They proved to themselves that they could tolerate voluntary scarcity in the presence of abundance. And once they proved that, everything else became easier. Everyone wants to know the secret to building wealth. Here it is. Get to $10,000 in savings and do not touch it for 6 months. Not because $10,000 is life-changing money. It is not. You cannot retire on it. You cannot buy financial independence with it. But holding $10,000 without spending it proves something to your brain that no amount of intention or goal setting can prove. That you are capable of having money and not consuming it. That you can tolerate the discomfort of voluntary scarcity in the presence of abundance. That you are no longer a person who spends everything they earn. The first $10,000 does not change your net worth much. It changes your identity completely. And once your identity changes, your net worth has no choice but to follow. This is the threshold that separates people who will build wealth from people who will spend everything they ever earn, regardless of how much they make. Not because of income, not because of investment returns, but because of the neural wiring that gets built, or does not get built, right around $10,000. The hardest money you will ever save is the first $10,000. Everything after that is just repetition of a pattern your brain has already learned. But that first $10,000 requires you to become a different person, someone who can see money and not spend it, someone whose nervous system has learned that resources can be stored, someone who has exited permanent scarcity mode. That transformation is worth more than the dollar amount suggests. It is the foundation everything else is built on.